Welcome back, my friends, to the revisitation of Twilight 2000, our game designer's workshop. This would be the series module called Redstar Lonestar, as the title obviously indicates, set in Texas. Now, this is a game module for use of GDW's World War III role-playing game Twilight 2000. The adventure deals with a group of American soldiers along the Texas Gulf Coast late in the year 2000, dealing with the different factions vying for control of Texas. They try to rescue a kidnapped oilman and his wife. Pretty much straightforward. It gives you good information. So, at this point, let's see what we got here. Got our intro, referee's notes, character plot, character backgrounds. Alright, so it talks about characters in this campaign may be drawn from several sources. They may be U.S. soldiers returning home from the overseas. In particular, they will probably be members of the 5th Division recently evacuated from Europe. Or they may be survivors of U.S. military units stranded in East Texas during any of several recent military campaigns. It suggested that the characters be from outside the region of southern Texas to keep them from knowing too much about the area. So, as we know in adventures such as Going Home, the player characters began the campaign, this Twilight 2000 campaign, in Europe, specifically in and around Warsaw and Krakow, and eventually made their way out. They may have done so by numerous means, either coming through the evacuation fleet or getting on the submarine during the Boomer sub-series. Perhaps they sailed by way of the Spanish Main and the USS Constitution replica, or maybe they, after doing their bit for the war effort in the Middle East, the still active U.S. military assets in that location allowed them to be flown back to the States or brought back to the States and by other means. In any case, they find themselves back in the States, and for one reason or another, set down by Galveston or Corpus Christi, I think Corpus Christi, find themselves in a situation which is traditional of having some kind of campaign or game, right? Yeah. It says Redstar Lonestar takes place in the southern portion of Texas, an area bounded by the Gulf Coast between Brownsville and the southern tip of the state of Port Lavaca and the cities of San Antonio and Laredo and the Rio Grande. The terror of the southern third of Texas coastal plain is low and rolling. Okay, a couple interesting notes. At some point in the year or two before this, the Mexican military, the government of Mexico, invades sections of southwestern United States. This is one of the sections of Texas they're unsuccessful at invading in any large degree. They're still being contested. They're aided in this invasion by the Division Cuba, the Russian division of troops that were stationed in and around Cuba, and were transferred to Mexico for this endeavor. After reading In Howling Wilderness, the idea was that lots of refugees were flooding over the border, some from Mexico taking the opportunities to move north, and oddly enough, or interesting enough, a number of refugees from the north were moving their way south to get away from the devastation of the cities and the nuclear fallout and the starvation and disease and plague and all the other things that were running rampant across the United States, which makes sense. So the Mexican government decided, no, we're not going to have this for any, and pretty much invaded the United States with the intent to recapture lost territory that once upon a time belonged to their Spanish predecessors. And this sets, of course, the United States military response, the militias and response, the local citizens to some degree, and it becomes one more messy section of the United States that's in flux. So at this point, the southeastern section of Texas is still pretty much in the control of the Texans, and in some aspects, the Texans are beginning to more and more see themselves as Texans and not as Americans, and that also has some interesting and convoluted bits to play in the possibility. So we conducted adventure, general encounters, NPCs, rumors, intelligence. It says here, homecoming in Port Lavaca. What the hell do you mean Texas ain't part of America anymore? The news that caught us flat-footed, but I thought Texas was going to be to bring the place down around the barkeep's ears. Texas not in the United States? What the hell happened? One of the first things you learn when you join the Army is not to believe 95% of what you hear and disregard the rest as rumor. Now we were being told by the bartender in Port Lavaca that the wildest of the stories we'd heard overseas was true. Apparently all things were going to pieces in the States. In '98, the flow of immigrants across the border of Mexico turned into a flood. Local National Guard and militia units had panicked, opened fire. Mexican Army intervened, helped out by Soviet Division Cuba, whose commander decided he'd made an entirely too tempting nuclear target where he was and hired out to the Mexicans in exchange for passage out of Cuba. Yes, the rumors were correct. There were Russians in Texas. In San Antonio, with large American population to protect them from the people with itchy nuclear trigger fingers. So while we were at loose ends now, the Texans found out that Houston and wasn't in a bad way. The rest of us damned, we were all down. As we thought we made it back home, we find there's still hundreds of clicks behind enemy lines, with home just a memory far, far away. That's when we met Jeff Ortega. So, it says here under referee's notes, Jeff Ortega is a right-hand man for William Texas Bill Kingsley, rancher whose large spread at the head of Lavaca Bay has been directed by Kingsley to find a group trained with soldiers with weapons to bring them to the Kingsley Ranch. Ortega had heard the band of soldiers who just arrived at the port and come looking for them. He offers the characters ammunition and drugs that they will come out to the ranch. And let's be specific about here, drugs as in medical drugs, not as in dope. I'm just saying. To come out to the ranch and at least talk to his boss, Texas Bill. If the characters accept Ortega's offer, he will lead them to a battered methanol-fueled port pickup and drive them and Ortega's two cowboy bodyguards across the Bay Bridge to the town of Point Comfort, then north to his employer's ranch. The mission, the expedition. It says 10 days ago in the middle of the night, a band at least 15 men invaded the Kingsley Ranch. 4 of the ranch hands at the gate had their throats cut before they could give the alarm. The invaders, wearing black clothes and watch caps, carrying automatic weapons, using commando-style tactics, seemed to know exactly where to go. They penetrated the mansion, killed 2 more guards, broke into the bedroom of Bill Bob Kingsley and his wife Kathy Jean. A shout and gunfire awakened the household. There was a pitched battle in front of the house in which 2 of the invaders were killed. The rest fled in an unmarked truck, taking Bill Bob and Kathy Jean with them. Kingsley has assumed the ransom note would be forthcoming. It has been 10 days now, however, and no communication has been received by the kidnappers. Kingsley has enemies, all wealthy men do. When he hasn't believed any of them would be simply murder his son and daughter in cold blood. But why no demands? No threats. What has happened to them? So the mission is now to track them down, find them, rescue them, bring them home. That's pretty much straightforward. So, of course, as in most things, it's never quite straightforward. An expedition, preparing for the expedition, completing the mission, ending the adventure, further adventures in southern Texas. I give you some options. Redstar Lonestar can be played out in various goals. The most important goal, of course, is to rescue Bill Bob and Kathy Jean. The characters are successful. The rest of the couple of the adventure ends. They return to Kingsley Ranch. More difficult and more ambitious, the resolution might occur if the Soviets destroy the La Familia Marauder forces in Brownsville, then are forced to retreat to San Antonio. The characters might choose to remain in Port Isabel, begin pumping oil while sending Ortega and others north of Port Lavaca with word of what happened, blah, blah, blah. So, a lot of options. We got our people and organizations, various NPCs, you know, Bill Jr., Kathy Jean, Jeff Ortega, Major General Furmob, Familia, Federales, various militia and government or neo-government military groups, Southern Texas Grange, Mexican Americans, the largest single demographic group in Southern Texas in 2000 consists of U.S. citizens of Mexican descent called the Mexican Americans in this module. This group is caught between the Mexican Army and the refugees on one hand and Anglo-American right-wing groups on the other. Although Mexican Americans are proud of their Mexican heritage, often fiercely so, they're also patriotic citizens of the United States. Though this patriotism may consist of loyalty to one or another of the rival U.S. governments, it's the most commonly expressed as a genuine, deeply felt loyalty to the idea of the U.S. and what it's supposed to stand for: freedom of expression, individual equality, rule of law, and government by consent of the governed. While they are well educated, cosmopolitan in outlook, and economically aggressive, they have a strong stake in the traditional Western middle class belief that the individual, though through perseverance and hard work, can master his own destiny. In short, they are Americans. So they actually talks about how they have a tendency to not take kindly to Mexicans who are invading the country, and this makes it for some interesting possible conflicts of interest. And then we get in addition to the equipment list, general map of the vicinity, north of the Niger River. Okay, so basically we've got the Southern Texas Grange, which Kingley's a member of, and they've gotten their hands on, for starters, they're trying to rebuild their area of the country, and there's a movement among them to break away from the United States formally and to create their own government. In some aspects, they've attempted to do that. Texas, and I'm not trying to step on nobody's toes here, nobody's Texan toes. They want to get all riled up, but I'm an Iowan and I'm from the Midwest, and I'm going to tell you the way it is. You don't like it? Tough. Fact of the matter is that Texas has seceded from the United States on two separate occasions. Technically, they have been an independent government of their own on two separate occasions. They did, or semi-occasions. The first time was when their very conception, when they broke away from what was the Spanish Imperial Mexican government, and we saw the battle. Things like the Battle of the Alamo, and they were a short-lived independent country for 10, 15 years, whatever it was, and eventually had to formally join the United States, and because they needed the resources and the additional forces that the United States would bring them and keep them from being reabsorbed by the Spanish, much as they may or may not agree with that history. Then, better than 100 odd years later, what do we see? They seceded again from the United States as part of the Confederate States of America, not so much because of the slavery issue, but more because of the independence issue. In truth, they had their way at the time. There was a lot of conjecture. Texas would have seceded from the Confederate States of America too, and stood on their own feet and let the other two sides whack each other to death. So, I've noticed, as passing interest, that ever since the reconstitution of the United States from the aftermath of the Civil War, Texas as a state has done its level best to quietly make sure it's quite capable of being independent from the rest of the United States. They have a large contingent of the U.S. military established there. And with the traditions that make them so they want to stay there, they have independent railroad systems and communications and power networks that are, while tied into the rest of the Southwest, dominantly control their neck of it. So if they were to be, there were other issues in the country that they wouldn't be cut off. They would still have quite a bit of control of keeping them, the lights on and keeping the communication going, keeping stuff moving around. Just pointing that out. Right. Then we got their mindset. So it's always Texas. Texans first, Texans before anything else, then Americans. And we still see that regionality in other parts of the United States as well. This is what sometimes surprises our foreign adversaries and foreign allies, is that they somehow believe that the United States, America, is this one big, huge entity, when in truth, it's 50 smaller entities with varying levels of regionalism. So, not to say that things could go south in a hurry, but one American's American. It doesn't matter where you're from. You're still an American. You're going to support America. But when I was National Guard and Reserve Forces deployed to the Middle East, I'm just using this as another example. It was not uncommon to see Iowa flags flying from the vehicles as they drove around in the media. You didn't see little American flags flying, you saw Iowa flags. And it wasn't because, the National Guard here said you must display the flag to show you're from Iowa. That was because the individual soldiers did that to let everybody know where we were from. And other parts of the country, similar things. Just pointing out. So we got the north of background, north of the Mississippi River, rumor mills, marauders, information on Port Levecca, overhead encounters, wounded civilian. A party comes across a street gang described above as the process of brutalizing an unarmed civilian. Attackers flee the party's approach, leaving their victim bleeding in the street. The victim cannot say it won't die. Moments later, before he dies, he clutches the shirt of one of the players' characters and whispers, "Oil! We're going to be rich again! Oil! Oil in Brownsville!" No one knows the dead stranger's name if the characters question the people. First bartender they talk to will remember that civilians came to town a week or two ago. He was part of a tough bunch that came down from south somewhere. He said, the bartender says the horse went lame and he couldn't follow his buddies when they hightailed it south, so he's been hanging around here spending money. He redeemed a bunch of silver when he got here, and he's been spending city notes like water for food, drink, and women. No wonder these punks went after him. Bartender also related remembers G&I to the characters. We got Victoria, counters. There we go. Civilian 2. A man recognizes Jeff Ortega as one of Kingsley's men. You damn Grangers aren't going to be running things here about much longer, the man shouts. He accuses Ortega trying to slip extra muscle into Victoria to back up the Grangers' power grab. He becomes increasingly violent from a crowd forms in the street watching uneasily. Guns, clubs, and handheld stones are in evidence in some of the crowd, but most are unarmed. Resolution of this encounter is up to the players and the referee. The characters can defuse the situation by simply walking away. If they threaten the man or attempt to hold or attack him, plenty of Texan Legion thugs are close by, ready to jump the characters and beat them up. Firefight will result in bystanders being hit. The characters will be disarmed by the local Mexican militia and locked up in the Victorian jail. Various different things. The Grangers, the Texan Legion Band. Local group that calls itself the Texan Legion may have nothing to do with the Texan National Legion, which is centered in north or east Texas. Numerous marauder bands use the name Texan Legion for reasons of prestige or to add authority to their demands. Texas Legion is described further on page 12. The situation in Victoria. Characters are passing through. It's probably that nothing will happen. They choose to remain in town for a time, or they're certain to become embroiled in the local political situation. The Grangers want to kick the Legion out of Victoria County. They hope to eventually kick the Mexicans out as well and proclaim the Lone Star a republic. Current forces total perhaps 50 men in Victoria and 100 scattered throughout the county. The Legion wants to break hold on the Grange over the local ranchers and farmers and set themselves up as the central authority. They hope to eventually kick out the Mexicans and establish the Texan Republic. They also number perhaps 100 men in Victoria. So you notice that these are different groups of Americans who have the similar goal. They want to reestablish the Texan Republic, and they just want to be the ones to do it and the ones to be in charge. Otherwise, they're going to agitate and to be in conflict with other like-minded individual groups to all their detriment. Instead of banding the Grangers and the Legion getting together and working their differences out in whatever form necessary, and then ganging up on the Mexicans and throwing them out, and actually seeing their dream of an independent state becoming an independent country again, they're going to bicker among themselves and prevent it from happening. We got Beesville, formerly a cotton and cattle raising center. In the years before the war, it became a prosperous oil community with a population of about 15,000. All oil refineries well in the area have been destroyed or shut down. Population now a community of about 20,000. Refugees, Arkansas, Pass National Wildlife Reserve, Bloomington, Chase Field Naval Air Station, Churro, Goliad, all the major little towns and important locations. Highway encounters. It's an abandoned vehicle. The characters find a vehicle abandoned several years ago, either during the nuclear exchange or later during the invasion riots when the fuel ran out. It's filthy, rusting, and long since been stripped of anything useful. There's a chance at 2d6 for 11 or less that a character with a machinery skill or MCH skill can salvage mechanical skills, I guess. Could salvage some small piece of equipment overlooked by earlier visitors. The nature of the equipment depends on the situation, and it's up to the referee, but can include a length of hose clamps, a valve, lengths of electrical wiring, springs, or an unbroken mirror. Minor things that you might find useful for other reasons. Map. Ruins of Corpus Christi, which was hit by an airburst, if I remember my reading. Harbor Bridge, Naval Air Station, Lamar's Base, John F. Kennedy Causeway. JFK Causeway extends across part of the intercoastal waterway. The northern tip of Padre Island remains undamaged after the nuclear blast and subsequent neglect. Grady Lamar has sought to control traffic on the waterway, as well as the land has established a small fortification on the bridge straddling the shipping channel. The port is made of rubble and debris hauled by Lamar's slave laborers. It's always manned 24 hours with automatic weapons and one M60 machine gun, several M203 grenade launchers. Small craft berth on either side of the passage come alongside boats hauled in the mid-channel by a bullhorn command backed up, if necessary, by a 40mm grenade and machine gun fire from the bridge. Stop boats are searched and attacks of goods is usually found or ammo is extracted for the right to pass through. Sentries are posted on either end of the causeway, blah, blah. North of the south of Nueces River, the background. Towns and landmarks, rumor mill. Look at a couple of these rumors. Rumor D, there's a cholera epidemic in Laredo. Some people are blaming the Russians for bacteriological warfare. Rumor E, a Soviet T-80 was knocked out yesterday in Freer by an ex-Green Beret with an ambush rocket launcher. There's been a lot of stories lately of Russians on the road south from San Antonio. Rumor F, the Mexicans and Mexican Americans are at each other's throats in Alice and Falaferelius. There have been rioting and widespread looting. Rumor I, someone has found oil tanks in Brownsville intact and full. It is said that millions of gallons were discovered. It seems incredible that such a bonanza could have been overlooked by both the U.S. when they abandoned the region and by the Mexicans when they invaded, but strange things do happen in war. Rumor L, Grady Lamar has found a way to pump oil out of capped-off wells. He's supposed to have brought in an expert on oil wells from somewhere up north. There's been an awful lot of activity among old refineries around Brownsville. Let's see, Alice. George West, Harlingen, Freer, Harbinville area, Marauders, Kingsville. See how he knows it covers most of the key locations and stuff. We got Brownsville location, town around it, Jeffy, the war, Redstar over Texas. So basically, here's the background on what's going on and what happened. Said the war, the Soviet Division Cuba moved out of Cuba on the Mexican transports in June of '98 into action shortly thereafter. Initially, the division proved to be far superior to the lightly equipped bodies of National Guard and Reserve Infantry, which it faced after a fluid campaign which embedded and flowed across central and northern Texas plains. The invasion ran out of steam. The U.S. counteroffensive of '99 failed. The war ground to a halt along a static lane front north of Texas and central California. Soviet and American military commanders eyed each other warily for some time, but soon the front line dissolved into a broad zone of chaos. Where there once had been armies, there were now only disorganized bodies of men, military units, marauders, and civilians trying to survive. The remnants of Division Cuba set up the winter quarters in around the city of San Antonio. Soviet commander knew the Americans would hesitate to incinerate 120,000 of their own people just to punish a few thousand Soviet invaders. For the first time in almost 2 centuries, the city of the United States was garrisoned by an old world military power. No Soviet flag flew over the Alamo there, for there was no reason for it. But the effect upon Texans, especially Anglo-American Texans, was just as electrifying. Late 2000, blah, blah. Dissolved, and the Soviets had one principal thought in mind: home. They were isolated in a hostile land with an active, and one might almost say exuberant, guerrilla underground harassing them at every opportunity, raiding the dwindling fuel and ammunition dumps, killing sentries, sabotaging vehicles, ambushing night patrols. Colonel Sergov noted in his diary that I will go to my grave with those whoops and shrieks and cries and remember the Alamo still ringing in my ears. See, that sort of thing always gets me. It makes me think of some of the stuff we see in the real world. And I'm not advocating terrorism or some of these actions, these terrorist organizations around the world. And not just the Middle East, but around the world. And sometimes how we or our leadership tend to misjudge or misunderstand their motivations. Why so few can do so much with so little to cause such a problem. And we know our history. We see it over and over again. And we should know, this was, if the shoe was on the other foot, just how would most of us act? The lion's share of us are pretty soft. I mean, I'm just saying, Americans are pretty soft. Europeans are pretty soft. You can get all the debate you want. You can get all the anger, but you can point fingers, whatever you want. It's the truth. It's just part of our society today. But there's still a core element. And these people, and I've got some of these people in my family, these people will fight more or less to the death over a point of something they think is worth dying over. And if you invade the United States, you're likely to find yourself buried under terrorist-like activities by a lot of odd individuals and groups of individuals, and not necessarily always the ones people always want to think of first. So why wouldn't that same mindset be there in other countries? And it's their homes. It's been the tradition of their homes. It's been the blood of their families and forefathers, and the remains of their families and forefathers lie in that land. It's home. Why wouldn't they not fight and defend it to extreme levels? Just pointing out, sometimes some places aren't worth the effort. If they're determined to eradicate each other, and they're doing it there, and they're not coming here, maybe we just better off to stay on the fence, stay on our side of the fence. If they come here, that's part of American mindset. We're going to come after your butt. That's just the way it is. And we're going to do a lot of terrible things in the name of freedom. And that's also part of it, good or bad. But we don't always need to go there if we don't have to. And we should always learn that there's a point in time when we brought enough pain and suffering and misery to the local communities that it's time to pack up and go home until somebody else comes from that neck of the woods and screws with us. And then we can go back and kick them some more. We're not there to occupy nobody. That's a problem somehow in our mindset in this government, U.S. government, hollow certain elements of the population. Anyway, the war, lure of oil, Soviets take Brownsville. Okay, here's what he's talking about, references to the oil all the time. At some point, some group has discovered that there's a still functioning oil rig in the Gulf, and they managed to get it operating again in a limited capacity, and they're pulling crude oil out and bringing it back to the country, and now are trying to get some kind of refinery going. Now, most internal combustion engines will not burn crude oil directly. Some diesel engines, older diesel engines specifically, and industrial diesel engines will burn crude. So a lot of diesel trucks can run off of it. They'd be rackety, noisy, and putting out a lot of smoke, but they can still operate. Ship engines that can be run off of crude. Ideally, they want to refine it to get those impurities out to make it more efficient, but that takes a lot of effort and a lot of resources and manpower, and more importantly, expertise to do. And yet, it's still plausible, and that's kind of what this is heading for. That somebody's got a source, and if they can get it going again and get it really going, it will make a huge difference to the economy and to what's happening in southeastern Texas. So that's what this is all about. And that's pretty much that. So there you have Redstar Lonestar. Good, interesting campaign. And I know one fellow that made a comment earlier when I was talking about it. He said, they spent pretty much their entire campaign revolved around one book, because there's always so much stuff going on in these things. There's so much opportunity that go off the script, so to speak. And that's what's a good game system. That's one of those things that, we had one of the questions we had in our my 30-day RPG challenge, whatever, for 2018, was what do we look for? What do I look for in a game, and what draws me to it, so to speak? And that's one of those things, because I've got a number of source books and modules that are just basic loads of unnecessary information or interesting stuff that's up to you, the GM, to find a way to utilize. Now, and I've had a lot of modules that are very script oriented, but they're very narrow focused. They don't have a lot of options. MERP, Middle Earth, is a good example of a game system that gives you multiple potential adventure modules or additions to this particular module or source book at the end of the day. And in this case, the whole thing could you could take a long time to work your way through this if you really wanted to get invested in it, your players got invested in it. That's one of the reasons why that fellow and his friends were able to do that. I'm of that opinion. And it's the same thing to be said when we're dealing with other modules. There you have it. So, Redstar Lonestar.